To switch on point numbers, let me just display attribute wrangle so that I can see just the points. You can use the options over here. So this is display points. We can display normals. We can display point trails. We don't have any at the moment. We can display point numbers. So this is usually quite important. We can do the same for primitives as well. If you want to see more options, just click on this arrow over here. Let me switch this off. You can also see that the points are not very visible. So what I want to do is change the background color. So let me hover over the viewport, press D on the keyboard. This will open the display options. And in here I have several different options. I can go to the background and change the color scheme to dark or gray. Let's see which one works best. Maybe dark. Okay, and we can close it. Another thing I can do here is use a different value for each channel, so red, green, and blue. So let me copy and duplicate this attribute wrangle. So I will hold down Alt on the keyboard and drag the attribute wrangle to the right. So now you can see that the connection stayed here, and I created exactly the same attribute wrangle. So let me select attribute wrangle number 2. And I'll write a slightly different expression here so that we can see the difference. So this time I will use just one channel, so color red, and I will turn it to 1. And let me display copy to points. And you can see that it didn't apply it, and this is because attribute wrangle is not connected to copy to points. Let me connect it. And you can also see to one input we can only connect one output. So if we wanted to use these two attribute wrangles, we would need to have them one after another, or we would need to merge them. Let me disconnect this attribute wrangle again by shaking to the side. And if I zoom out, you can see that we have a lot of nodes in our network and it's not very clear. So what I can do is press L on the keyboard to layout and then H to home all. So in our second attribute wrangle, I'm going to add 2 more lines. So CDG, this is green. I want this to be 0. And CDB, blue. I want this to be 0.1. So now we assign the same value to each brick. If I want to randomize it, I can use the same expression as before. Okay, great. So now I finished this part of the network, and what I can do here is create null, which is just a marker for me to say that this part is finished. So I can rename it to, for example, finished wall. Enter. And now I can add some animation to it. So let me create a new node called exploded view. Let's display it. And you can see that in the exploded view, I can change the uniform scale to move these pieces apart. So what I will do is I will set a keyframe on this uniform scale to animate it. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the timeline, and we have several tools here, so we can play it. And at the moment, you can see that we don't have any animation. We can scrap the timeline. You can change the initial start frame and the end frame. And you can also grab these little markers to zoom in the timeline. You can see when I zoom in, the second value here and the first one here change. And this is because the first value on the left, second value on the right are our timeline information. So it starts on frame 1 and it finishes on frame 250. However, this is the zoom information, so how much we see here in the preview. So let's select the exploded view node again. And now I can right click on the parameter value and go to keyframe, set keyframe, or I can hold down Alt and just click on the value. And now you can see that it turned to green. And also we have this line on frame number 1. So this green line, this is our keyframe. We can move between keyframes by pressing these 2 arrows. Now I can move to frame, for example, 50 and change this value to, let's say, 3. However, if I go back in my timeline, you can see it didn't create a keyframe. This is because I need to create it manually. So I'll do that again. H03 and then hold down Alt, click on the value. If I want the keyframes to create automatically whenever I change the value, we can do so by going to the keyframe settings and then switching on auto key changes. Okay, let me go back to the very first frame and now play the scene. So you can see that these 50 frames should be about 2 seconds, and this is much quicker. And this is because of our global animation options that we can open over here. So either Alt-Shift+G or just click on this icon over here. In here you can set frame per second for the whole scene. You can also set start and frame for the timeline and several other settings, but the one that interests us now is the real-time playback. So let's switch this on. We want to play every frame, but never faster than frames per second specified here. And we can even save it as default. So this is what you want to use for simulations as well. This is very important. Okay, save as default and close. So now when I play it, okay, that's much better. Once we have the scene ready, we can clear our network. So as you can see, we have 3 nodes that do the same thing. So we have 2 attribute wrangles and the attribute randomize. And I want to group them so that I know they do the same thing. At the top, you can see some tools. So we have the color palette. If we click on it, it opens the color palette. We can assign colors to the nodes. So let's see, we want to have the finished wall null to be red. So we can just drag this color to the null. And we can assign different colors to different nodes. Just remember not to use them too much because it will not help. Then the next node, the next option we have here is shape palette. If you click on that, you can assign different shapes to the nodes. Be very careful here because if I assign this light bulb shape to the null, someone might think this is light, not a null, so make sure to use them so that it's all clear. And then the next one, we have network boxes. If I select nodes and then click on the network box, Houdini will put all those nodes in this network box. So now I can hide all those nodes, expand them. I can give name to this box. Okay, so for example, color. And I can also assign colors to it. If I click C on the keyboard, it will open the color palette. So I can change the color of this box. Okay, I can also create sticky notes. So if you click on the next icon, that's a sticky note, so I can leave some notes for others. And one more useful thing we have here is adding images. So sometimes you want to have reference images, for example, in the background, or you want to have grid so that it's easier to lay out the nodes. Let's do one more thing here. So when you select the transform node and display it, let's go to the information. You can see how many points we have here, parameters, vertices, polygons, but you can also see that we have 1 point attribute. So let's see what that is. To see the attributes, you can go to the technical desktop and then open this geometry spreadsheet over here. Let's collapse Python shell. So now when I select the transform node, I can see the attributes over here. So I have position X, Y, and Z attributes. However, if I select my attribute wrangle node, where we created color attributes for red, green, and blue, you can see we have 3 additional attributes here. So a thing to remember here is that we have parameters such as values in X, Y, and Z. And we also have attributes which are displayed in the geometry spreadsheet. When we set keyframes on the parameters, we create channels. So animated parameters. Houdini also uses different data types, and some nodes will ask you to choose which one you want to work with. So we have, for example, an integer, and this is a number that is not a fraction, a whole number such as 1 or 157. And we used it in Houdini when we specified the number of axis division for the box. So as you can see, I cannot type 2.5 in axis division. It must be an integer. Another type is float. This is one value, which can be an integer or a decimal number. And we use this one to adjust the uniform scale or single translate, such as translate in x-axis. Houdini also works with vectors. And this is typically a collection of 3 values separated with a comma and stored in the braces. So it can be, for example, 1, 4.5, or it can be RGB, so color channels. And finally, we have strings, and this is a non-numerical value such as text, and we'll use it most often for file paths in Mantra. We also used it to link the uniform scale of the transform and the point separation of the points from volume. Let's go back to the object level now. And what I want to do here is hide our objects except for the box number 1. I will also rename it. So we can rename the objects, the nodes, by double clicking on its name. I will rename it to wall, and I want to hide the other 2. So just click on the display flag on the other 2. Now to preview the final simulation, I can save a flipbook. In Maya that would be called a playblast. And you can do so by clicking on this notebook. If you right click, you can go to the flipbook settings. So right click, flipbook settings. I can set here a start frame and end frame. By default, these are linked to our start and end frames over here. Then I can go to the size tab and just make sure it's 100%. And I can click start. This will open a separate window, and as you can see, everything that we have in the viewport is displayed over here. Okay, nothing is happening after frame 50, so I'll just press escape to cancel saving, and I can play it here, and I can also save this flipbook, so I can go to file, save sequence as, and then choose my location. You can also run renders, so just click on this film reel to open Mantra. So again, a separate window where you will see your render. Okay, and that's it in the introduction to Houdini and its interface.